Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play, and today we are talking about how to deal with toxicity at work through play. Now, the best way in which to get the most out of this is please comment in the chat. Feel free to share with each other as we want to share each other's experiences and see where we can find commonality. And also, I will be using the word a-hole from time to time, so if that bothers you, I do apologize in advance. All right, let's get started. So I think I first want you to visualize that toxic person at work. Why are you even at this workshop? It's because potentially you either have a toxic person at work or you used to. So I want you to visualize that toxic person at work. And then I want you to write in the chat, what are the traits of that toxic person? What is it that bothers you about that person? And as you're writing in the chat, I want you to also then think about, how does this actually make you feel to describe this person, to think about this person, for this person to actually occupy your mind, in your mind space, right? All right. Now, after you've done that, then I want you to shake that off for a little bit, and then I want you to visualize a coworker that you admire, that you appreciate, someone that you actually look forward to seeing, where you're like, oh, I want to go to the office because I do want to see Natalie there. You know, what is it about that person that you admire? Write that in the chat. And even as you're writing it in, start to recognize, how does it feel now to think about the person you admire as opposed to the toxic person that you were just thinking about, okay? Because we're going to break down why that actually matters and how that actually affects our productivity. So here's what we're going to be covering today. The goals for today is to delve into the impact toxic staff have on organizations, explore how much it's costing to keep that toxic person at your job. Then we're going to learn techniques to diffuse the toxicity at work. And finally, we're going to identify strategies to address your own toxic person. Now, what you may be coming up to, and let me know in the chat if this resonates with you, is, you know, the challenges you might feel is that you want to make a difference, but you feel blocked, you know, like there are people getting in your way of actually being able to address this issue. Or maybe you don't feel like you have a lot of resources or support right now to actually address this. Or finally, as some people are feeling, they're feeling burned out because they're at their wits' end and they really don't know what to do. So those are the things that we're going to actually try to tackle here today. So let me tell you who I am. I'm Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a toy designer. I wanted to be in the toy industry. I saw the movie Big when I was in third grade. And as soon as I saw it, I started writing toy companies in third grade. And I kept writing them throughout junior high, high school, and college until I got into the toy industry. And I don't know if you've ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted and then been so disappointed when you get there, but that's exactly how I felt. And why? Because it was a toxic work environment, toxic leaders, toxic staff, a lot of backstabbing, a lot of ego, and it just was not a healthy place to work. And I was in my 20s and I was like, I'm out of here. And maybe that's how some Gen Zers feel right now when they get out of college and they come to the workforce, and then it seems so toxic to be there. So then I left New York, came to the Bay Area, and I found an organization that was teaching kids engineering with Lego. And together, through play and curiosity, we built it into the largest Lego-inspired STEM organization in the US. But we did it all by playing, following our curiosity, prioritizing people over profits. But the biggest step that we did is we actually addressed our toxicity problem. It took us a while to do it, but once we addressed it, we actually were able to reduce turnover and we are actually able to increase profits. And I can get into that in more detail of how that actually happened. So my question to you is, does your organization suffer from a-holitis? Do you currently have a toxic person or multiple toxic people at your work? So let's break down 6 types of toxic people. Now, there are plenty more, but this kind of covers the gamut. So just write in the chat if any of these actually resonate with you. So we'll start off with the self-righteous, the person that is always right and always letting you know that you are wrong. They suffer from that. After the self-righteous, you have jerkitis, the person that's constantly mean. Perhaps they've been there for so long and they just want to leave, but they can't leave and they're just bitter. We don't know why, but they're just extremely mean. Then, of course, you have entitled, the person that constantly thinks as if they never need to work hard for anything. They usually are there either because of nepotism or because a friend promoted them, and they feel they don't have to do any work, but they feel they will take credit for any work that you do. Oh, that's a different one. Then, of course, there's arrogance. The person that's, I'm better than you. They think they're better than you. They think they're better than the team. They think they're better than the organization. And frankly, they should be the CEO of the organization. And they're just there, just letting everyone know that they are the worst and they are better. And then, of course, you have dismissive. These are the people that are constantly at meetings being like, no, that's a bad idea. No, that's a horrible idea. Oh, we did that idea 10 years ago, but it didn't work then, so it's not going to work now. Oh, those are the most frustrating for me. And then finally, and this one's a surprising one, and this is sometimes the most tiring one, is the frenemy. The person suffers from frenemy disorder. One hand, they're super nice, have your back, and then all of a sudden they're backstabbing you. And where they stand. So if you have that as your person, just let me know. So then after you identify that, then we have to identify what are the triggers. What is triggering you about that toxic person at your work? So go ahead and write that in the chat of like, what actually triggers you? Is it when they're dismissive of your ideas? Is it when they're taking up too much room at a meeting? Is it simply their presence? What is it that actually triggers you? Because the more we can be aware of our triggers, the more we can actually check ourselves so that we don't get affected as much by them. Right? And then after we've broken down what our triggers are, then we have to ask ourselves, what is the impact that this toxic person is having on my work? How does dealing with this toxic person affect my work, right? Do I feel less engaged? Do I feel like I don't want to go to work? Do I feel like I don't want to share in meetings? Am I thinking about this person after work? How is this actually affecting my work? And also, how can it potentially be affecting all of the staff that I work alongside as well? So those are things that are really important for us to analyze and recognize for us. Now, there was a study that was not done not that long ago, I believe by UC Berkeley, that found that toxic people actually make us stupid. This was talked about in a TED Talk around office politics. And it did a study where they had two groups, one control group of students and one group that wasn't the control. And the control group walked in to take an aptitude test. And when they walked into this room to take the aptitude test, there was a sign that actually said, hey, it's actually not in this room, it's down the hall, go ahead and take the test. Then the second group walked in, and when they walked in, there was a professor that was there, and he was just like, what are you doing here? What are you, stupid? The test is not happening here. The test is happening down the hall. Hurry up, you're already late. Get over there. Gosh, what are you doing? Both groups took the test. The group that got insulted by the professor performed 30% worse than the other group. Now think about that. That is just one insult. Imagine that toxic person being around 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. What type of effect is that actually having? And the bigger question, how much is that costing us? Well, I can answer that. SHRM did a study back in 2019 that found out that due to toxic people, turnover was so high that companies were losing $223 billion over the last 5 years. And that was a study done of companies that were willing to admit that they had a toxic person. And that was in 2019. So it's higher now. Gallup did even a more concerning poll. What they found that when a toxic boss exists, disengagement happens that is costing companies between $450 to $550 billion per year. This is real money that we're talking about. Now, these are huge numbers. So how is this actually specific to how much it's actually costing potentially your organization or your team, right? So let's break that down. How much is it costing your team and your company? Well, first off, when you have a toxic person on your team, a Michigan State study found that we are producing $14,000 less in productivity per employee. So imagine if you have 5 staff, that toxic person is costing you $70,000 per year. Imagine you have multiple toxic staff, so you see the ripple effect. In addition to that, every time that toxic person persuades someone to leave, how much is that costing you? It is costing you 6 to 9 months of that person's salary to actually find, recruit, and train and hire a new person. So if you're paying them $60,000 a year, it's $30,000 to $45,000. Now we're in California, so a lot of tech companies, you're paying up 6 figures, up maybe $100,000. So then it's costing you between 50 to 75 for each person that leaves. And then in addition to this, and we rarely take this into consideration, but that toxic person can actually cause a potential lawsuit. And just to litigate, just to do the research to prepare for it, can cost upwards of 75 to 150K a year. That's not even talking about if you lose. If you lose the case, it might be even more money. So this is costing real money. And I provide this to you as ammunition that you can share with your leaders so that you can start to address this. These are real costs that we need to actually address, right? So then when people brainstorm, when leaders are like, you know what, we need some new revenue generating ideas. What do we want to do, stuff with AI or VR? Like, we need something new. I always suggesting this. Why don't we get rid of the toxic people in the workplace? Why don't we eradicate that behavior? Because that is going to have a much bigger impact than any other innovation. Why? Because it's revenue generating, dramatically improves morale, increases innovation and productivity, and reduces absenteeism and turnover. So then now let's actually get into how we can actually do this. So I mentioned earlier that I used to run this Lego-inspired STEM organization, and there we had a toxic person. And I remember going on vacation to this place called Iguazu Falls right here in Brazil. Definitely go. One of the most amazing things I've ever done in my life. And while I was there, this toxic person was occupying my mind. And as I was sitting there watching these waterfalls, I was like, man, I'm only going to be here for like 80 to 100 years tops. These waterfalls have been here for hundreds of thousands of years, right? But as long as I make decisions that are bold, but with compassion, I need to make harder decisions. So leaving that vacation, I had the epiphany that it was time to let this person go. I came back, talked to our boss. He liked this guy, so he didn't want to fire him. But then I outlined exactly what we talked about earlier. I outlined how much it cost, what were the drivers, why was it important to let him go, how many other people had quit because of that. And when I showed him all the numbers, then he reluctantly agreed. The next day we brought him in, we let him go on the spot. 6 months later, we had let go of 4 other toxic people. 2 people that quit because they realized they couldn't act the way they used to act, and 2 people we let go because our standards had risen. Now, it doesn't always happen that fast. Sometimes this takes years to actually address. We had another toxic person that took like 5 years before they finally started going to therapy. So it's different realms, but we have to recognize that there is possibility for success, because we have to know that toxicity thrives in silence. And the more we're willing to speak up, we actually can address it directly. So what did I do when I was speaking to my boss? I actually focused on primary motivators and drivers. So this is part of the play of me being like, let me experiment here. Let me identify where there are actual holes where I can actually make some inroads, right? So I first was recognized, okay, what are the main goals of the organization? Oh, you want to make money? Well, we're losing money because of this guy. Okay, what are the values of the organization? Oh, well, ours is built on fun, curiosity, and creating a psychologically safe workspace. This person is doing the exact opposite of that. Are we okay with that? I don't know if we're okay with that. Then I identified the main drivers of the decision makers, specifically my boss. And I was like, if you want to expand, if you want more market share, if you want to make more money and not lose out on your own bonus, then we need to address this, and we need to address this directly. And then finally, and this one's very hard, is I also had to identify the primary motivators of that toxic staffer. Maybe the answer is not to get rid of them. Maybe it's just to simply understand, why are you acting the way you're acting? Is this actually benefiting you? Is this actually helping you? Because it's not helping us, and when you're actually approaching it from that standpoint, you can actually start to make some movement. So then let's get into solutions and get really into the nitty gritty of this, right? And I'm going to talk from, least impactful to most impactful, and also easiest to implement to hardest to implement. So let's first get into reframing and redirecting. So the reframing, this is very playful in a way, because what you do is when that toxic person goes on the rant, this is when you reframe what you're looking at, right? You're not looking at your staffer. You're looking at potentially a child. You're looking at a clown. You act as if you're a scientist that is examining toxic people, and this is a specimen that's having some sort of tantrum right now, right? That's one way of reframing. You're almost disconnecting emotionally from the situation. That actually helps. You can also embrace Michelle Obama's approach of being like, does this really matter 5 years from now? They're going low. I refuse to go low. So I'm just going to sit here, wait for them to go rant, and then I'm going to let them go on their way. So that is one way. It doesn't change their behavior, but that is one way to cope. Second is you challenge that toxic person directly. So if you're at a meeting, before the meeting, you strategize with everyone else. Be like, listen, Chad always cuts us off. So Samantha, when you're talking, and he cuts you off, I'm going to get your back if you can get my back, right? And then when he's speaking, be like, whoa, hold on. Samantha was speaking right there. And she actually is the project lead on it. So I think we really need to hear from her right now. And the more you start to do that, the more you strategize with Samantha and Natalie and Jonathan and you start to occupy more space, you start to take over the meeting. He's not running that meeting anymore. And if you can have someone that is running the facilitation and sets the ground rules of the playground, woo, all of a sudden, different rules of the playground, he can play, right? The other way you can challenge them directly is you can talk to them right after the meeting. So you come back to them after the meeting. If you don't feel comfortable doing it by yourself, you do it with multiple people, and you go, hey, Chad, sorry if there's a Chad here, but this is what we're talking. Hey, Chad, so what is it that you want to get out of these meetings? Because if it's more ideas right now, that's actually not happening. And when you say this is the impact that it's having. So again, you don't attack Chad's character, you address his behavior and the impact that it's actually having. This sometimes works, right? Where that person may not know that they're being an a-hole right now. They're like, oh, I didn't even realize that. I'm just like oblivious, right? That is a possibility. Or they might just be like, whatever, I'm going to do whatever I want. And then at that point, that's when you need to be talking to your supervisor. That's when you need to be documenting, being like, this is the impact that is happening on the staff. And you see if that supervisor, if you see that if HR is actually willing to address this directly. Now, what happens in the case that you have a boss that is also toxic? Because toxic bosses typically hire toxic people so they can also act and run amok. This is actually a great opportunity to actually see where your company stands, right? Because when you do a skip level and you talk to somebody else, or you talk to HR and you're like, this is actually how much it's actually costing us. This is the effect that it's having on our staff. This is how less profitable we are because of this. And they have a choice at that point. Do they choose the side with the organization, or do they choose the side with the toxic person? If they choose the side with the toxic person, then at least you know where they stand. And then you know this is not the right place for you anymore. And then you can move on your way, right? But let's say you do leave, right? You still have to deal with potentially another toxic person at your next job. So this is the last step, and the hardest step to implement is addressing your inner toxic person. Why does this person trigger you? How does they actually affect their work? So you think about, okay, oh my goodness, when Chad says certain things to me, I actually believe those when I shouldn't believe those at all. I actually am more qualified than Chad. I actually should be Chad's boss. I actually should be getting paid more than Chad. So that when Chad speaks up the next time and is super rude, you can be like, whoa, hold on, Chad. Don't ever say something that disrespectful to me again. And as soon as you do that, that inspires me, right? Because then I'm like, oh my goodness, Samantha just stepped up to Chad. I can step up to Chad. And then Johnson's like, I can step up to Chad too. And then everyone starts to step up and not tolerate his behavior anymore. And then he has two choices. He either chooses to leave because he can't act like a child anymore, or he changes his behavior. That is one way, or those are a few different ways in which you can actually diffuse and address toxicity. The other part is we have to be practicing. We have to be practicing having these hard conversations. I show this because in football, they practice all week for a 3-hour game. We never get to practice. So having hard conversations, either with your supervisor or with that toxic person, get practice in with your colleagues. The more we can embody how this feels, right? The more we can play with this, the more we can be rooted in who we are and know what we're going to do in various scenarios before we go into a situation where we're addressing toxicity. Now, the other thing we got to talk about is power. Power a lot of times is not addressed enough. And like you have agency regardless of your level. But I still recognize there's a certain amount of power that you have to address. So let's talk about from entry level all the way up to C-suite level of what power and agency you actually have. So for the entry and junior level staffers, recognize that you have allies. So find your allies, find employees at your level that are dealing with the same situation. Heck, even maybe other people from other teams, right? Start to gather those stories, share your story, but then start to gather those stories as well. And as you're gathering their stories, you're actually going to start to collect data and start documenting that data, not just from yourself, but from other people. Bob Sutton, who wrote this book around a-holes, recognized that there was one person that actually had a toxicity journal that she would actually use. And then she got some of her other colleagues to also do this toxicity journal to track the behavior of this one person. By the end of the year, they had multiple journals full of issues that they were able to bring to the HR team as well as their supervisor. And then that person was let go of. So these are really ways in which you can actually document and make a difference. And then the other thing is recognize your leverage and access you have. You have access, you're on the ground floor. You get to talk to everyone that is actually doing the work, right? And recognize the leverage that you have. We are still in a great resignation. So you have leverage to look for another job and also see something like the Amazon worker that got laid off and then eventually unionized the staff. These are ways, or the same thing with Starbucks. These are ways in which you have more power and agency that you actually realize. And if you still don't feel comfortable addressing it directly, finding a decision maker or someone that can make that decision or speak on your behalf is also really important to do. For mid-level managers, you're in a tough position because you're getting crapped on from the top and you're getting complaints from the bottom. So I get it. It is rough out there. But while you're doing that, I recognize that the more research you find out to recognize why people left in the first place. Why did staff leave during the pandemic? Was there a pattern that showed up? Look at exit interviews. If you can talk to former staff, if you can talk to your current staff about why people left, doing this research, looking up on Glassdoor and recognizing what patterns are occurring, and then how many people have actually left and how much that's costing us, really crucial. Also have this harder conversation with your staff. Did we gain trust or lose trust with you during the pandemic? What actually happened during that time? What were some of the decisions that we made that maybe had us lose a lot of trust, right? So start having those conversations and being like, all right, how is that potential toxic person affecting your work? And if you don't feel like you can have those conversations first, then you need to start doing other steps to start to build trust with your staff so you can have these hard conversations. And then recognize your circle of influence. Yes, maybe the whole company is toxic. Maybe the whole department is toxic, but your team does not have to be, right? And if you can run new experimental ways and play to try new ways out of managing from a compassionate, empathetic, and shared humanity place of leadership, and you are more profitable and you have lower turnover because of it, you can be like, look, it's working for us. Why wouldn't other people adopt this type of strategy, right? So these are the ways in which you can experiment to actually make progress. And then now for executive and C-suite level, the question you need to be asking yourself consistently to the team is, what is the worst behavior we are currently tolerating, right? Why are we letting Chad run amok and not do work? Because when he's not doing work, it inspires everyone else to not do work as well. Why are we tolerating that, right? So let's address that directly. Then we need to really reassess, what metrics are we measuring success by? Is it more important right now to retain employees, or is it more important to hit our quarterly profits? Is it more important for us to hit just to focus on our numbers, or is it more important to create a space where people feel safe enough to share? What do we do actually build on trust and build a psychologically safe workspace? We need to reassess what our metrics are and if those metrics actually are helpful in creating this safe space and not celebrating toxicity at work. And then finally, we need to start funding committees and employee resource groups, or ERGs. So these are ERGs that are potentially built around DEI, or ERGs built around, trying to help bring in more women leaders into, the board, or heck, even into executive level decisions. So how are we funding these organizations, and how are we funding these small groups and supporting them and helping to facilitate some of those conversations? Because these might be the only groups where people feel seen, heard, and appreciated. So recognize these and foster these, cultivate these. And then finally, when you're trying to strategize and implement all of this, it starts with really understanding what are your main goals, right? What are your goals in addressing this toxicity? Is it simply to get this one person fired? Or is there more of a holistic approach that we need to address, where we need to address why we're celebrating toxicity in general and how do we change that behavior? Then recognize what are your initial steps, because this is going to take some time, right? And recognize who are your allies that can actually help implement some of these strategies. And then finally, recognize that there are going to be obstacles in your way, that this is not going to be an easy road. And you have to decide, is this something that I'm really willing to commit to? And how do I help, how do I get support so I can do this effectively? Answer these questions for yourself with other people. And this is a way in which you can start to make inroads and start to address it right now. And then finally, we need to celebrate compassionate leaders. Who are the leaders that deserve recognition at your organization? Those are the compassionate leaders that are getting this organization to thrive, right? Jacinda Ardern was a perfect example of this during COVID. She found a way to both lead from a feminine and masculine standpoint, right? Both having compassion and understanding, but also being decisive and very clear, and was able to meld those together in order to create a society where they had the lowest COVID rates, where they had the lowest amount of deaths, because she showed up with that certain level of compassionate leadership. And we need to be celebrating more of those type of leaders. I know I've went through a ton of stuff in a short period of time, so I have provided my slides at this link as well as I've provided a worksheet that you can actually walk through and ask many of the questions that I pose there. And then I also provided links in that same page where I list a lot of the studies that I actually touched upon, so you could actually reference these yourself and help as we really try to accept the fact that the workplace isn't an enjoyable place right now. And the only way in which we can address this is we need to address the toxicity at work so that we can make going to work enjoyable again. That is my presentation. And now I'm open to any questions you may have.